Ever wondered about the man behind the myth of Pablo Escobar? You've likely heard the headlines, the Hollywood dramatizations, but there's always more to the story. Let's dive into the untold saga of Pablo Escobar, a journey from humble beginnings to a notorious kingpin. What propelled his rise? What secrets linger behind his empire? Fasten your seatbelts. We're about to unravel the enigmatic tale of Escobar like never before. Early life and rise to power. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, a name synonymous with the Colombian drug trade, didn't emerge from opulence. Born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, to a teacher and a peasant, young Pablo's journey to notoriety was as unconventional as it was steep. The 1960s marked his entry into the criminal world. Initially, his activities were low-tier smuggling stereo equipment and stealing cars. It's almost ironic, considering the empire he would later build. By the late 1970s, Escobar found his calling in the burgeoning drug trade. Cocaine was gaining popularity in the United States, and Escobar, with his shrewd understanding of supply and demand, jumped on the opportunity. The rise of the Medellin cartel, with Escobar at its helm, is a story of ruthless ambition. By the early 1980s, the cartel controlled a significant portion of the cocaine trafficked into the U.S. But how did Escobar manage this meteoric rise? His strategy was a blend of charm and terror. Escobar knew the value of loyalty and fear. He cultivated a Robin Hood image among the poor in Medellin, financing housing projects and soccer fields. To many, he was a benefactor, a man who cared for the disenfranchised. This public image was in stark contrast to the chilling reality of his operations. The cartel's operations were sophisticated and far-reaching. From processing coca leaves in Peru and Bolivia to transporting the final product through the Caribbean and into the States, Escobar's empire was a well-oiled machine. The numbers were staggering. It's estimated that at its peak, the Medellin cartel was responsible for 80% of the global cocaine market. But Escobar's ambition wasn't confined to the drug trade. He sought legitimacy and power in the political arena. In 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress. This move, however, would soon backfire. His criminal activities were an open secret, and his political aspirations crumbled as his true nature was exposed. The Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, played a pivotal role in this, leading to his assassination in 1984, a crime attributed to Escobar. This marked a turning point. The Colombian government, under increasing pressure from the United States, declared war on the drug cartels. The extradition treaty between Colombia and the U.S. became Escobar's biggest fear. He infamously declared, "I prefer a grave in Colombia to a cell in the U.S." The 1980s were marred by escalating violence. Escobar, determined to avoid extradition, resorted to terror tactics. Bombings, assassinations, and bribes became his tools of trade. The infamous plata o plomo, silver or lead, approach defined his reign: accept his bribes or face deadly consequences. Escobar's influence extended beyond Colombia's borders. His cartel's operations in the U.S. were a testament to his reach. Miami, in particular, bore the brunt of the cartel's presence, with the city witnessing unprecedented levels of violence and corruption in the 1980s. Despite his criminal empire, Escobar was a family man. In 1976, he married Maria Victoria Henao, and they had 2 children. His family life was a stark contrast to his public persona, offering a glimpse into the complexity of the man. Escobar's power was immense, yet fragile. His public image as a generous benefactor masked his ruthlessness. But as the 1980s drew to a close, cracks began to appear in his empire. The Colombian government, bolstered by U.S. support, intensified its efforts to dismantle the cartel. Escobar's days of power were numbered, but his legacy was far from over. The height of power. As the 1980s progressed, Pablo Escobar's influence and wealth reached staggering heights, painting a complex portrait of power and paradox. The kingpin of the Medellin cartel, Escobar wasn't just a drug lord, he was a phenomenon, a master of duality who wielded both benevolence and brutality with equal ease. Escobar's empire was built on the back of the global cocaine trade. At its zenith, the cartel was smuggling 15 tons of cocaine per day into the United States, amassing an estimated fortune of $30 billion for Escobar. Such wealth placed him on Forbes' list of the world's billionaires for 7 consecutive years, starting in 1987. This financial power gave him an almost mythic status, but the means to maintain it were far from heroic. The cartel's operations were a masterclass in logistics and ruthlessness. Cocaine blocks were ingeniously concealed in everything from airplane tires to shipment containers. Escobar's network spanned continents, with tendrils reaching into North America, Europe, and beyond. His methods for maintaining control were equally extensive and brutal. The cartel's reign was marked by violence, with countless murders attributed to its operations. Despite this, Escobar nurtured a carefully curated public image in Colombia. He fancied himself a modern-day Robin Hood, generously funding community projects and charity events. The construction of entire neighborhoods for the poor, like the famous Barrio Pablo Escobar, and the financing of numerous soccer fields for the youth were strategic moves to win public favor. His social and ecological programs further bolstered this image. But beneath this veneer of generosity lurked a dark and violent reality. Escobar's reign was synonymous with the phrase plata o plomo, a grim choice offered to police, politicians, and judges: accept his bribes or face bullets. His cartel was responsible for countless acts of terrorism, including the bombing of Avianca Flight 203 and the infamous siege of the Colombian Supreme Court in 1985. Escobar's power extended into the realm of the absurd. Stories abound of his lavish lifestyle and extravagant spending. One anecdote tells of a time when, while hiding from authorities, he burned about $2 million in cash just to keep his daughter warm. His penchant for luxury was evident in his private estate, Hacienda Napoles. The estate boasted a private zoo with exotic animals like hippos and elephants, a fleet of luxury cars, and even a private airstrip. His influence wasn't limited to Colombia. In Miami, Escobar's operations led to a surge in drug-related violence, transforming the city into one of the key battlegrounds in the war on drugs. His reach within the United States was a testament to his power and the fear he instilled. Escobar's ambition knew no bounds. He sought political legitimacy and influence, attempting to insinuate himself into Colombia's political sphere. His election to Congress in 1982 was a bold move, but his criminal activities couldn't be concealed forever. The assassination of Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in 1984, a crime linked to Escobar, exposed his true nature and led to his expulsion from the political realm. The United States and Colombian governments, increasingly alarmed by Escobar's power, intensified their efforts to dismantle his empire. The extradition treaty between the two countries became Escobar's greatest fear, fueling his campaign of terror against government officials and civilians alike. Yet for all his power and influence, Pablo Escobar was a man of contradictions. A family man devoted to his wife and children, his private life was a stark contrast to his public persona. He was a man who could be charming and generous one moment, ruthlessly violent the next. His ability to maintain this duality was a key aspect of his power, but it also sowed the seeds of his eventual downfall. Escobar's height of power was a time of paradox, of wealth and violence, of public benevolence and private brutality. It was a time when his empire seemed untouchable, but the forces arrayed against him were gathering strength. As we delve into the war against the state, the fragility of Escobar's empire becomes apparent, setting the stage for his eventual downfall. The war against the state. By the late 1980s, Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel had become a formidable force, not just in the underworld of narcotics, but as a direct challenge to the Colombian state. This chapter of Escobar's life marks a transition from a drug lord's ambitious ascendancy to a full-blown war against the authorities, a conflict that would have profound implications for Colombia and beyond. The catalyst for this war was the Colombian government's decision to pursue extradition treaties with the United States. For Escobar, extradition was a fate worse than death. It was an attack on his empire and, more significantly, on his sense of invulnerability. He responded with a campaign of terror designed to intimidate the state into submission. The scale and audacity of Escobar's actions during this period were unprecedented. Bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings became tools of his trade. One of the most notorious acts was the bombing of Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, killing all 107 on board, an attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate who wasn't even on the plane. Similarly, the 1989 bombing of the DAS building in Bogotá, which housed the Administrative Security Department, resulted in hundreds of casualties. These acts of terror were not just against specific targets. They were messages to the state and the world of Escobar's reach and ruthlessness. But Escobar's war was not only waged with bombs and bullets, it was also fought in the courts and the media. He utilized a strategy of plata o plomo, silver or lead, offering bribes to officials and murdering those who refused. This approach extended to judges, politicians, and police officers, creating a climate of fear and corruption that hindered law enforcement efforts against him. Escobar's ability to wage this war was underpinned by his immense wealth. He financed his operations through the drug trade, using the profits to buy loyalty and silence. His resources seemed limitless, and his network of informants and assassins, known as sicarios, was extensive and deeply embedded in Colombian society. Despite his violent campaign, Escobar attempted to maintain a facade of legitimacy. He continued to position himself as a benefactor to the poor, funding social projects and cultivating a Robin Hood-like image. This duality, a brutal criminal mastermind on one hand and a generous patron on the other, was central to his strategy. It allowed him to maintain a base of support among the populace, even as he waged war against the state. However, the tide began to turn against Escobar. The Colombian government, bolstered by U.S. aid and support, intensified its efforts to combat the drug cartels. The formation of elite military units and the use of advanced surveillance technology marked a new phase in the government's campaign. The pressure on Escobar and his cartel increased, leading to fractures within the organization and betrayals by former allies. This period saw some of the bloodiest episodes in Colombia's history. The escalation of violence affected every level of society, from the slums of Medellin to the corridors of power in Bogotá. The Colombian people bore the brunt of this violence, with thousands falling victim to the crossfire between the cartels and the state. Escobar's war against the state reached its climax in the early 1990s. His increasingly desperate measures to avoid capture and extradition only served to isolate him further. The assassinations of high-profile figures, including presidential candidates and law enforcement officials, sparked public outrage and strengthened the resolve of the Colombian government and its allies. Amidst this chaos, the figure of Pablo Escobar loomed large. He was no longer just a drug lord. He had become a symbol of the violence and corruption that plagued Colombia. His actions during this period would leave a lasting imprint on the country, shaping its politics, society, and international relations for years to come. The war against the state was a defining chapter in Escobar's life. It highlighted the extent of his power, but also its limitations. As the net closed around him, Escobar's options dwindled. His reign of terror had made him one of the most wanted men in the world, and his downfall seemed inevitable. The next chapter, focusing on his time in prison and subsequent downfall, reveals the unraveling of one of history's most notorious criminal empires. The prison deal and Escobar's downfall. The early 1990s marked a pivotal juncture in Pablo Escobar's life, a period where his seeming invincibility began to crumble. Faced with relentless pursuit by Colombian and U.S. authorities, Escobar made a move that was as cunning as it was audacious. He struck a deal with the Colombian government. This chapter in Escobar's saga is a testament to his ability to maneuver, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. In 1991, Escobar agreed to surrender and serve prison time, but on one extraordinary condition: he would build his own prison. The result was La Catedral, a facility that was less a prison and more a lavish fortress. Located atop a hill in Envigado, it featured amenities like a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and luxurious quarters. It was a symbol of Escobar's power and influence. a prison that ensured his comfort and safety while ostensibly keeping him confined. However, La Catedral was more than just a plush residence. It served as Escobar's operational base. From here, he continued to run the Medellin cartel, maintain his criminal network, and even orchestrate the murder of enemies. The Colombian government, under intense criticism, could no longer ignore Escobar's flagrant abuse of the agreement. The decision to move him to a more conventional prison was made, a move that led to Escobar's most dramatic escape. In July 1992, as authorities moved to transfer him, Escobar fled La Catedral. This escape ignited one of the most extensive manhunts in Colombian history. The government, now fully committed to capturing him, formed the Search Bloc, Bloc de Búsqueda, an elite unit tasked with tracking down Escobar. The U.S. provided support in the form of intelligence, logistics, and training, underscoring the international desire to see Escobar brought to justice. Escobar's escape from La Catedral marked the beginning of his downfall. No longer protected by his fortress prison, he was constantly on the move, evading capture but unable to operate with his former freedom. The cartel that he had built began to crumble under the pressure. Key associates were either captured or turned against him, and his control over the cocaine trade weakened. As the months passed, Escobar's situation grew increasingly desperate. The Colombian government's resolve stiffened, and the resources dedicated to his capture multiplied. The search bloc scoured Medellin, engaging in frequent shootouts with cartel members. Escobar, once the master of Medellin, was now its most hunted man. Adding to his troubles was the rise of a vigilante group known as Los Pepes, perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Composed of Escobar's enemies, including rival drug traffickers and paramilitary groups, Los Pepes waged a brutal campaign against him. They targeted his associates, properties, and family, further weakening his empire. During this time, Escobar's influence in Colombia's criminal underworld diminished. The once feared drug lord was increasingly seen as vulnerable. His resources dwindled, and his options narrowed. The relentless pressure from the authorities and his enemies took its toll, both on Escobar and on those close to him. Despite the danger, Escobar remained in Medellin, refusing to flee the city that had been the center of his empire. His family sought refuge abroad, further isolating him. He was a shadow of his former self, on the run and running out of time. The final days of Pablo Escobar were marked by a sense of inevitability. The combined efforts of the Colombian government, the U.S., and his numerous enemies had boxed him in. The empire he had built over decades was gone, and his fate seemed sealed. His downfall was not just the collapse of a criminal empire, it was the end of an era in Colombia's history. Escobar's story is a cautionary tale of ambition, power, and hubris. From the heights of his power in La Catedral to his desperate final days as a fugitive, his journey reflects the volatile nature of the criminal world he dominated. His downfall set the stage for the final chapter of his life, the dramatic and violent end of one of the world's most notorious drug lords, the final days. The final chapter in Pablo Escobar's life is as dramatic and intense as his rise to power. Following his escape from La Catedral in 1992, Escobar was a man on the run, his empire crumbling and his list of enemies growing. These were the days of a desperate fugitive, not the all-powerful drug lord he once was. In hiding, Escobar's movements were severely restricted. He moved between safe houses in Medellin, constantly wary of the ever-present threat of capture. The city that had once been his stronghold was now a labyrinth of danger. Despite this, Escobar refused to leave Medellin, showing a stubborn attachment to his hometown. The search bloc, spearheaded by Colonel Hugo Martinez, relentlessly pursued Escobar. They used sophisticated technology, including radio triangulation, to track his movements. The U.S. provided intelligence and technical support, making it increasingly difficult for Escobar to evade capture. Amidst this manhunt, Escobar's personal life was in turmoil. His family, seeking asylum, moved from country to country, eventually finding temporary refuge in Germany. Isolated from his loved ones, the drug lord's situation grew increasingly desperate. He was a shadow of his former self, both physically and in terms of his influence. Los Pepes, the vigilante group, continued their ruthless campaign against Escobar's associates and properties. They destroyed his homes, killed his lawyers, accountants, and relatives, effectively dismantling the support network that had once protected him. This onslaught not only weakened Escobar, but also sent a clear message. His time was running out. In his final days, Escobar was heavily reliant on his dwindling network of loyalists. He communicated with his family using radio phones, a method that ultimately led to his downfall. The search block, using directional finding equipment, zeroed in on his location through his phone calls. December 2, 1993 marked the end of the chase. After triangulating his position from a phone call to his son, the search block closed in on Escobar's hideout in the Los Olivos district of Medellin. A firefight ensued, with Escobar and his bodyguard trying to escape via the rooftops. In a final act of defiance, Escobar fired back at the pursuing officers. But it was a futile effort. He was shot and killed on the rooftop, a stark and unceremonious end to the once feared drug lord. The official report stated that he was killed by the police, but speculation and rumors suggest otherwise. Some believe he took his own life, a theory supported by his family, who claim he preferred suicide over capture. Escobar's death marked the end of an era in Colombia's history. The man who had once been the world's most notorious drug trafficker was gone. The reaction in Colombia was mixed. While many celebrated the end of his reign of terror, others mourned him as a benefactor. His funeral in Medellin drew a large crowd, reflecting the complex legacy he left behind. In the aftermath of his death, the Medellin cartel disintegrated. The Colombian drug trade, however, did not end with Escobar. It simply evolved, with other cartels rising to fill the void he left. The violence and corruption that had characterized his reign continued, albeit under different leadership. Escobar's final days were a dramatic conclusion to a life marked by extraordinary power and brutal violence. His story is a stark reminder of the transient nature of power in the criminal world. His death did not bring an end to the drug trade or the problems it created. It merely turned the page on a chapter in Colombia's ongoing struggle with narcotics trafficking. The legacy of Pablo Escobar is complex and controversial. To some, he remains a symbol of the Robin Hood figure, a man who stood up to the authorities and provided for the poor. To others, he is a symbol of terror and violence, a man responsible for countless deaths and untold suffering. His life and death continue to be a subject of fascination, a tale of ambition, power, and downfall that still resonates today. The aftermath and legacy. The demise of Pablo Escobar on December 2, 1993, marked the end of a tumultuous era for Colombia, but it was far from the end of the story. The aftermath of Escobar's reign and his enduring legacy present a complex tapestry of change, continuity, and reflection in Colombia and beyond. In the immediate aftermath, there was a palpable sense of relief among many in Colombia and the international community. The fall of the Medellin cartel, which had been a significant player in the global drug trade, was seen as a major victory in the war on drugs. However, this victory was more symbolic than substantive. The void left by Escobar's death was quickly filled by other drug cartels, notably the Cali cartel, which took over many of the Medellin cartel's routes and operations. The Colombian drug trade, deeply entrenched and lucrative, adapted to the new landscape. The nature of the trafficking networks evolved, becoming more discreet and fragmented. This shift led to a decrease in the high-profile violence that had characterized Escobar's era but did not significantly diminish the flow of narcotics. The fundamental issues driving the drug trade poverty, demand in consuming countries, and the vast profits to be made remained largely unaddressed. Domestically, Escobar's death allowed Colombia to enter a new phase in its fight against narcotics trafficking. The government, with continued support from the U.S., focused on dismantling other cartels and drug networks. This ongoing battle has been marked by successes and setbacks, with the issue of drug trafficking remaining a persistent challenge for Colombia. Internationally, the legacy of Pablo Escobar has had a lasting impact on how drug lords and cartels are perceived and handled. His life story has been the subject of numerous books, films, and television series, often romanticizing or sensationalizing aspects of his life. This portrayal in popular culture has contributed to a certain mythologizing of Escobar, sometimes overshadowing the brutal realities of his actions. In Medellin, the city that was the epicenter of Escobar's power, the aftermath of his death has been profound. The city has undergone significant transformation in the decades since, striving to shed its image as the world's murder capital. Investments in education, social programs, and urban development have been part of a concerted effort to heal and rebuild. The communities that once suffered under Escobar's reign have seen notable improvements in quality of life and reductions in violence. However, Escobar's legacy is not entirely negative. In some of the poorer communities of Medellin, he is still remembered as a benefactor who provided housing and other amenities. This duality in perception reflects the complex nature of his impact on Colombian society. For the families of Escobar's victims, his death brought a sense of justice, albeit incomplete. The scars left by his reign of terror and the broader conflict around the drug trade in Colombia have taken a toll that continues to resonate. The issue of how to deal with such trauma and memory remains a challenge for Colombian society. The story of Pablo Escobar is also a lesson in the limits of militarized approaches to drug control. His life and death have sparked debate on drug policy, with some arguing for more holistic approaches that address the root causes of the drug trade, such as poverty, inequality, and the demand for narcotics.